Welcome, everybody. I'm Gigi Rosenberg, and I'm a public speaking coach, and I am so thrilled to be here with today's guest, Bradley Tusk. I met Bradley when I literally bumped into him in New York City. I knew exactly who he was. I had read his first book, The Fixer, and then when I invited him to be on the podcast, he said yes, which thrilled me beyond belief. So welcome, Bradley. I'm so happy to have you here.
Good to see you again, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So Bradley Tusk is a venture capitalist, a political strategist, a philanthropist, and a writer. He's written 3 books, including a novel. He's also the founder of the Mobile Voting Project and Tusk Strategies, and CEO and co-founder of Tusk Ventures, among many other endeavors, including his wonderful Firewall podcast and a bookstore in my favorite city, New York City. So welcome to the show, Bradley. We're going to start big picture.
Okay.
I want to know, given that my listeners are speakers who want to be better speakers,
Yep.
It seems like your expertise is helping people and yourself bring big, impossible, possibly impossible ideas to the world that people are maybe afraid of, maybe skeptical about, etc.
Yep, sure.
So when you start helping them shape the messaging for these big ideas, what do you do? Like, how do you start chipping away at that?
I think for me, especially on the venture capital side, because when we're investing, effectively the founder is pitching us and saying, okay, this is my idea, this is my vision. You know, we're pretty early stage investors, so the company's usually not that far along when we get involved, but they have to be able to a certain extent sell us the vision in a way where, at least as I'm hearing it, I have to be able to say to myself, okay, even if the founder isn't quite communicating it in the way that I think is necessary, I see it and they're the engineer and that's fine. I don't need them to be brilliant just yet at public speaking, but the vision has to be something that we can communicate in a way that's simple, right? So like the first startup I ever worked on was Uber, and it was, Travis actually I think was a pretty good communicator, but either way, it was pretty simple. And that was like, getting a taxi sucks. We will get you one by pressing a button on your phone that will come to you. Done. Right. And the fact that the company grew so big, so fast was a pretty clear sign that that message was so intuitive to people that it just took very, very little. Right. And oftentimes, even though, you know, venture capital is about investing money in order to generate more returns for your investors, in reality, it's really about, you know, can you tell a story that ultimately people will want to pay for, right? Every single business in the world ultimately has to be able to sell a product or a service. And if someone isn't willing to pay money for that product or service, you don't have a business, right? And communicating what that value proposition is simply and cleanly and in a way that resonates with people without too much explanation is usually the key. And sometimes I won't invest simply because I might think it's a good idea, but I know that by the time that you're done trying to explain it, you will have lost your entire audience and it's not really worth it. Now, look, if the customer base is some really technical group that actually has time for all of that or expertise, great. But if it's consumers writ large, or for me, I'm also thinking about regulators, politicians, media, all of that. If you can't convey the message in some form that's fairly logical and concise, usually you're not going to succeed.
Right. So I have to ask you a question. I hear something in the background.
It's just the New York City pipes, as you remember, the heating.
Oh my God.
Nothing to do about it.
You know what it was? I thought it was like a little, I imagined a little dog going, yap, yap.
No, I have a dog. He's not here today, but it's just, if you remember from your New York days, the thing that no New Yorker has control over, no matter how much money they have, is the radiator. It's just.
Got it. So it's taking this big idea then and really simplifying it. But you said it, especially about the Uber thing, in such like street language. You said it like that's what you would say to somebody if you were having a beer with them. Yeah. And that's what I think is the most difficult thing, that, you know, most people stay so high level and so abstract. You can't understand what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the lesson here, and I apply this both to myself and my own speaking and writing and podcasting and teaching, and also to our portfolio companies and our clients and everything else, is just speak and write and communicate in plain, simple English. You know, explain things in ways that anybody can understand, that is to the point, that is logical. Stop trying to sound smart. Stop trying to impress people. Stop using big words. If the big word is actually the single best word to use, fine, great, use it, but don't use it because you think it conveys something. Now, I'll give you an example where my team drives me crazy is when they send out proposals to prospective clients on the consulting side, they will often use like 11-point font and have it single spaced. And I'm always like, why? And they don't really answer, but I know their answers because they think it makes them look smart. But the reality is, if you make something harder to read, people are less likely to read it. If they are not going to read the proposal, they're not going to hire you. And therefore, it should be 13-point font and it should be 1.5 or double spaced. And you should make things easy to read and well spaced and well formatted. And I think that that's just a microcosm of a broader misconception. And I would argue, I think in many ways, our schools, especially our more elite schools, really do a disservice in that they seem to believe that the more complicated something sounds, the smarter it must be. And as a result, people really don't learn how to effectively communicate.
Right. Absolutely. It's almost like you have to unlearn what you learn with academic writing to be able to,
Totally. So I'll give you two examples. One is the worst grade I got in law school was in legal writing. And the reason why is I had been a creative writing major in college, so I kind of knew how to write already. And I think I've gotten better since. But legal writing is a very specific, very formal, very academic way of writing. And I just refused to do it. And the teacher was really mad. And I was like, listen, I understand what you're saying to me. I believe I'm capable of doing what you want. I just refuse to do it. And because I knew I was never going to practice law, I didn't care all my grades were going to be in law school anyway. So it's like, whatever. And so I was just sort of like, look, I'm just not going to write this way. And if you want to give me a C, which she did, give me a C. So, these things definitely happen. Also, to the same point, we frequently will not hire people who have public policy degrees because our view is you learn how to work in politics by working in politics. You learn how to work around government by working in government. And people who just learn theory at schools with lots of ivy on the walls, to me, they come in not only not knowing what I need, but they know a lot of things that ultimately aren't that useful at all. And then I have to unteach them and then teach them. It's easier just to not hire them in the first place.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. But it takes a lot of confidence to say, I'm not going to go for looking smart. I'm going to go for connecting with that audience. It takes a certain.
You're right, but all of my experience tells me that it is far the more effective approach.
Yeah, and then you feel confident because if you say it straight, they're going to get it.
I mean, look. So I'm on TV a lot, right? And one of the reasons I'm on TV, or like the main reason, is producers know that if they bring me on and it's a topic that I have even just vague familiarity with, I will be able to convey some clear points that are somewhat original and creative in a concise way that is engaging and works well with the hosts. And as a result, I'm an easy guest, right? And so CNBC or whoever has me on knows that. And because I am able to just explain things in a pretty simple way, it gets me a lot more opportunity. And then, because I'm on TV a lot, that generates more business opportunity, more deal flow, more investment, more clients, more influence to get the things that I care about philanthropically done. So there really is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy where if you can speak and communicate cleanly and compellingly, you really will get more opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So what if the idea scares people? Or there's a lot of skeptics, or we've tried this before, or it's not going to work, or there's hecklers. And, what do you do about that?
Yeah, I mean, a few things. So sometimes there are just very specific tactics that I think we all use to deal with this. Like when you mentioned hecklers, what I find, like I've been on book tour, just finished it, for the last couple of months, is if it's a big audience, I find that I just sort of lock in on one or two faces. And what really helps me, quite frankly, is when it's a positive face. In fact, a scowling face makes it really hard because then in the back of my mind, I'm starting to wonder why they're scowling. But I try to quickly sort of divert my attention to somebody else. So some of it is that heckling happens, especially in this mobile voting work that I'm doing. I certainly get that. It's funny. I was speaking at the University of Iowa a little under a year ago, kind of early 2024. And I wouldn't say a heckler, but there was a the question for someone who's a computer science professor that just deeply believed that mobile voting could never be secure and was a terrible idea and was the end of democracy as we know it. And, I tried to answer his questions politely a couple of times. And he just wouldn't stop. And he wouldn't stop talking. And I just had actually kind of regret, which was, look, because in some ways he was knowledgeable about computer science, but computer science professors, or I think he was a professor there, tend to not be the most articulate, sort of public speaking oriented people. I actually just kind of made a fool of him, which by saying, ladies and gentlemen, this is why our democracy is in crisis. Because people who genuinely don't believe things can get done, and all they do is say no, and all they do is tell you things can't happen. And I turned the crowd against him. And then, you know what? I felt like a jerk later. Because yes, it worked in the moment. But here's this guy who and he might not even be a nice guy. He wasn't being nice to me. But I humiliated him and I regretted it. And ultimately, what I have learned in life, now that I'm getting a little older, is the only thing that really matters is my happiness. And my happiness is really based on feeling good about myself on a sustained basis. So when I do things that don't make me feel good about myself, kind of regardless of the impact of the thing or how it impacts other people, it's a huge loss for me.
Right.
I spend the rest of the day feeling bad about myself. And so that would be an example where I dealt with it in a way that sort of was effective because the crowd enjoyed it.
Right.
But ultimately, I regret because I should be better.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Interesting. So let's talk a little bit now about storytelling.
Sure.
So I'm assuming you think stories are important to tell, but often people have trouble finding the right story, a good story, telling it shortly, short and not too long. So when you're looking to help somebody find the right story, how are you advising them? Like what should they be looking for?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that the first thing is just what is it that if you're telling a story, inherently that there's either an idea that you want to convey that you think is important, or a lesson, or an anecdote. So I think the good news is, even if the person isn't sort of naturally inclined towards being able to sort of tell it the right way, they know what that thing is. And by the way, and if there is no thing, then you shouldn't be talking, right? If you have literally nothing to say, then don't talk. But assuming they do, then for me, it's like, okay, let's talk through, what is this idea or vision you have? What is this really funny anecdote? What is this lesson or moral that you've learned? And then start building it out towards something that is relatable to people. But almost always, it's like when I encourage people, just tell me what you think. Don't worry about sounding smart. Don't worry about impressing me. The more that they can just sort of convey it off the top of their head without putting too much thought behind it, usually ends up being kind of the best approach.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the trap people fall into is they can start to get a little just too abstract and too preachy. And then I'm like, no, tell me about the one time, the one thing happened that you remember, or that was dramatic, or that changed something,
And also little details. Like I was on a radio interview yesterday, and they were asking about tech donors to Trump's inauguration. And they were saying well, what is the $1 million that Sam Altman or Mark Zuckerberg or whatever go towards? And, the answer is sort of events and parties, but instead I said canapes, because, that was a tangible, specific thing. And the host laughed and we had a good time with it. And if you can just evoke a little bit of detail and kind of spell something out, oftentimes you already have the image in your head, right? So it's really just drawing it out verbally. That will go a lot further. And so, I always try to kind of sprinkle in as much specific and vivid sort of detail and examples as I can, because it just makes any story better or any point better.
Right. Well, it was the perfect thing, because canapes also is so lavish and so over the top. Yeah. And so it's only the fanciest parties. They're not having, hot dogs wrapped in Pillsbury dough.
Although personally, I would prefer a pig in a blanket to a canapé.
Oh my gosh. Well, now I want to talk to you about, I know you hear a lot of pitches from startup founders, and, there's a lot of money involved. It's very high stakes. So what are the qualities in a pitch when you're thinking, as you're starting to hear it, oh yeah, this sounds great. This sounds good. If you were going to give a little public speaking lesson to those those
Yeah.
founders, what would you say to them?
So the first thing, there's a few things. One is because I invest fairly early in this cycle, I'm making a bet on the founder, herself or himself. And so seeing what they're like and the way that how passionate they are about their idea. But typically speaking, what I tell people often is being a tech founder is an absolutely miserable job because it is your entire life at the expense of everything else. So the only reason to do it is if you cannot live without doing this, right? If you truly believe I will die if I don't get the chance to try to build this company, this idea, this product, then by all means. And I want founders that feel that way, right? So when I see that level of passion, it's not the only thing I'm looking for, but it's the first thing I'm looking for. The second thing would be, I want them to both know and understand this is a business and it's designed to try to make money. And here is the thing we have, the product or service that we will sell, that people currently don't buy, that they will spend money on because it is so great. And what is that and why and what makes it different? And then the third would be, where can you take it, right? Like, I don't really have an expectation that the business that I'm investing in fairly early stage is really the same business that we're going to have 5 years later. In fact, if it is, we probably fail. So I don't need you to be able to have a crystal ball and predict the future, but I do need to know that you at least hope and see that things will happen this, then this, then this, then this, and you can spell it out to me. I fully understand that's going to change, but we need some vision and plan that we're working off of, right? So I'm looking for all of that. What I'm not looking for, what often to me is almost like a turnoff, I guess in those ways, is when people try to impress me with like pedigree and status and things like that, right? Like when someone puts like what business school they went to in the deck, I'm like, I don't want to work with this person because keep in mind, when I'm investing, we're probably going to be in this company for at least 7 years, maybe more like 10. So I'm kind of going to be married to these people, right? We're going to be together for a long time. And yes, I have to think that you have a business that can be incredibly successful, that can be $1 billion company. There's a huge market. There's a bunch of things I have to believe, but I also just have to want to work with you, right? And I don't mind if someone's maybe a little abrasive. I don't mind if they're a brilliant engineer, so therefore they don't necessarily have the social skills, as long as they understand that about themselves and they're willing to hire for that. But if I just think you're kind of a jerk and I'm like, I just don't want to work with you, that basically kills it simply because we just have to spend too much time with the founder and their team. And by the way, an unhappy organization is not a fun organization to be involved with or be a part of or something else. So, to me, when someone is trying to overwhelm me with like, then I went to Yale, then I was at McKinsey, it's like, I don't not care. But like, oftentimes, the more to me that you just keep picking the establishment up, kind of gold standard after the establishment gold standard, you're probably not the kind of disruptive personality that's going to come up with this brilliant idea that changes everything. You're probably too wedded to the status quo.
Yeah. It sounds to me like you're looking for a certain kind of hunger.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I teach at Columbia Business School, and I made my students really angry last year because I said to them, none of you are going to be billionaires. They all were very taken aback by that. What do you mean? I said, well, you're in business school. You're inherently risk averse. If you weren't, you wouldn't be here. You'd be doing the thing right now that's going to make you a billionaire, or doing the thing that fails that then leads you to the next thing that's going to make you a billionaire. All of you are hedging your bets, which is not dumb. It's probably very smart, but it means you're going to go work at an investment bank or a consulting firm or something like that. Because if you were truly, truly risk friendly, you wouldn't be here in the first place. And so ultimately, I am looking for people who are a little weird and disruptive and are not worried about what everyone thinks of them and whether everyone likes them and, what their resume looks like. They're worried about trying to change the world by building this specific idea.
Right. Wow. That's so great. I want to move now to talking a teeny bit about your novel.
Sure.
So there's a scene in which one of the characters, Susan, gives what Nick calls a very confident speech. And at first he's very impressed. And then she decides to go horribly off script, and it's a complete disaster.
Yeah.
So what I want to know is, when you're advising people, or even for yourself, how much to stay on script, how much to improvise, what happens if things go to hell because of the improvisation?
Yeah.
What do you do?
So one, sometimes they do go to hell because of improvisation, and then you're usually trying to work your way out of the hole. I would say this: if you are a seasoned public speaker, public communicator, and you want to improvise, odds are you have the gut, the experience, the wisdom to know when to do it. So I will call an audible for myself frequently, right? If whether I'm on a podcast or TV or speaking at a conference or whatever it is, or I will really engage with the host or the audience and kind of go where they are and kind of take it in a different direction. But this is what I do, right? So like my very first job out of college was in communications, right? I was the press secretary for the New York City Parks Department. And so like I've been in and around this kind of work for over 3 decades now. And so I know what I'm doing. If you are newer to this, I would say, yes, you could call an audible and it might turn out to be a genius move, but there's also a pretty good shot that it will be a disastrous move. So I think initially go in knowing, and actually I give people this advice all the time. What are the couple of points on this podcast, this interview, this TV hit, this speech that you really want to get across? And how are you going to get them across? And what kind of repetition do you need? Because usually you need to say something more than once for people to break through to get that done. And that should be your goal, right? It may be that you're able to roll with it in a way that is truly funny or truly different. But odds are, until you have that level of confidence and expertise, my advice is to sort of know what you're trying to achieve and really focus on that. And then when it comes to humor, it's a double-edged sword, right? Like you can be funny, but one, you better be good at it. And two, I mean, I don't go anywhere near a bunch of topics simply because A, they're not really how I tend to think and speak anyway, but B, like the odds of something bad coming out of it are so much greater than the odds of something good that, like, you know, I'll make a joke about canapes, but I'm not making a joke about sex, right?
Right.
It's just, like, to me, like that's just asking for trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when you see a speaker who you think, wow, they're really good, they're like, they've got me, what are the qualities that you're seeing that they have? Or are there examples of people that you just think are amazing?
Well, I mean, they're present, I think, first and foremost, right?
I'm sorry, what did you say? They're what?
They're present. They're with
present,
you. They're focused on you. They are, you know, at that moment, the only thing they care about is communicating with you, convincing you, making, you know, engaging with you. Like they would say that, you know, when Bill Clinton's genius politically, and the man had a lot of flaws, but was that when he spoke to you, you felt like you were the only person in the world, right? And that was his true genius. And obviously, he was thinking about 100 different things at the same time. He was just extraordinarily, historically talented at that particular thing. You know, we all can't be Bill Clinton. I'm certainly not. But the speakers who are really present and really engaged, that matters a lot. The speakers know what they're talking about and they're passionate about it. That matters a lot. The speakers who are able to communicate in clear and concise English or whatever language you speak, as opposed to trying to use big words and impress me, that matters a lot. So those are the kinds of speakers to me that really work. And then also it's interesting, like one advice that I give political candidates a lot is the forum also matters a lot. So like, I think podcasts are unusually effective mediums of communication. I think that when you listen to a podcast, if it's your regular listener, you almost feel a bond with the host, right? Like I've met people who listen to my podcast and they'll say like, it's so weird talking to you because they feel like they already have that conversation. And I know that because I think of the podcasts that I listen to, and I have, you know, Bill Simmons, the sports guy, like I have an ongoing conversation in my head with him, I think. I've never met him, but like, I bet I would feel that way too. But even the guests, it is a medium in which you can connect with the listener in a way that is different than TV or radio or print or anything else. So like when people are running for office, I always advise them, like, go on as many podcasts as you can, because if someone listens to you on that and you do well, you're going to get their vote.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting because it's so intimate. There's, someone's voice is in your ear, Yeah. So I totally agree.
Radio doesn't do the same thing. It theoretically should.
No. It doesn't. Yeah, absolutely. The one goof I've seen some CEOs even make is sometimes they don't practice enough for the easy answers. Yeah. Like once, somebody asked a CEO, what does your company do? He knew, but he gave the longest, most convoluted answer. And it was obvious that he didn't, prep for that simple, concise.
I'll give you another example. My world of politics. You know who always loses their presidential race? The candidate that cannot cleanly, easily, and persuasively answer the question, why do you want to be president? Yeah. Because when that happens, it means that when they're talking around it, it's because the answer is because I want the power, because of my ambition. And they know they can't say that.
Right. And
they make up a bunch of stuff.
They don't know what else to say.
Right? Yeah. Then it sounds totally phony, and then they've lost you forever.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like Hillary Clinton in some ways, of course she should have won that election.
I know.
But you know what? She really could never answer that very basic question.
Yeah.
And it doomed her.
Yeah, it did. But, the reason she couldn't answer it is she wanted it so badly. You know what I mean? And it was so it was so obvious, Yeah. Oh, goodness. Well, let's go on now. I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about your latest book, Vote with Your Phone. Sure. Give us the elevator pitch for the book.
Yeah, sure. So as I think the listeners have sort of figured out, I've spent a lot of time in politics. And I've worked across the board. So in city government, I mentioned the Parks Department. I also was Mike Bloomberg's campaign manager and for mayor of New York. I worked for City Hall. I worked in state government as the deputy governor of Illinois. I worked in federal government as the communications director for Chuck Schumer, who's the U.S. Senate Majority Leader. And the thing that I took away from all of it is simply every policy output is the result of a political input. Every politician makes every decision solely based on the next election and nothing else. And yes, there are some exceptions. Bloomberg happened to be one, but there are exceptions. And because of gerrymandering, which means that legislative districts are drawn up in a way that basically guarantees that either a Democrat or a Republican specifically wins that seat, the only election that really matters is the primary. And primary turnout in this country is very low, typically about 10 to 15%. And who are those voters? They're the far right, they're the far left, or they're special interests and know how to move money and votes in low turnout primaries. And they dictate not only who wins office, but then what those people can do once they're in office. So our elected officials are effectively held hostage by them. And that gets us one of two types of government, either the absolute chaos and dysfunction of Washington, D.C., that doesn't work, or a totally one-sided government, whether where you are the city of Portland on the left or the state of Texas on the right. I would argue any government where people can't talk to each other and have discussions and compromise and build consensus is an ineffective government. And as a result, a lot of our biggest problems, whether it's guns or immigration or healthcare or climate or affordable housing, don't get solved because either we have totally one-sided solutions that tend to be heavily flawed, or they can't agree on anything at all. And if the American people were truly evenly divided on everything, that's one thing. But we're not. If you look at almost every policy issue, about 70% of us agree on sort of the framework of a solution. So take guns. 70% of us would say we should neither confiscate everyone's guns, nor should it be easy to walk into a store and walk out with an assault rifle. But that 70% don't vote in primaries, their views don't count. 70% of us would say we should neither deport everyone here illegally, nor should we have open borders. That 70% don't vote in primaries, therefore their views don't count. So it seems to me that the real answer is if we want politicians to represent us as a whole and work together and get things done, the people they're representing has to be a lot broader because they're only representing those who will vote in their next primary. So the question becomes, how do you meaningfully increase primary turnout? When I ran a bunch of the campaigns around the U.S. to legalize Uber, the way that we won, because at the time we were a tiny little tech startup and taxi was a pretty muscular industry, is that through the app itself, we were able to mobilize our customers and they told their local elected officials, hey, I like this Uber thing, please leave it alone. And it worked. We would have thousands of people in any given, city council district tell their member, hey, hands off.
So in the app, that question was asked and then they could answer it right there?
Yeah.
Wow.
Basically, we would put up a notice that would say like, if Uber is under threat in Portland, if you want it to continue, click here. And then we would take you to your city council member, and then you would be able to communicate to them through email or text or tweet or call, wherever makes sense. And ultimately, collectively, millions of people did. And we won in every single market in the country. So as this is happening, I remember thinking like, okay, God bless these people. This is great for me. But my guess is they don't actually have an idea who their state senator is. They haven't ever voted in a city council primary, right? To the extent that they consider themselves regular voters because they vote for president, right? And my question was like, okay, they don't vote in most local elections and primaries, but they are advocating for us because we put it on their phone. What if they could vote this way? And so in 2017, I started the Mobile Voting Project. And the first thing we tried to do was answer the question and test the hypothesis. If you make voting a lot easier, will people do it? And I didn't know the answer, but I thought it was worth trying to find out. And so we used the existing tech on the market at the time. And we funded elections in 7 different states, either deployed military or people with disabilities, voted in real elections on their phones. And not surprisingly, the vast majority said, yeah, I like pressing a button better than going somewhere. Turnout went way up. And the answer to the question was yes. If you make something a lot easier and put it on people's phones, more will do it, right? That has been since the invention of the iPhone almost 20 years ago, the lesson we have learned. So the next question became, does the tech exist that is secure enough to do this at scale, right? Not just for discrete groups, but for everyone.
Because that's the fear that, all these votes will come in from robots,
Right. Totally. So the view was that the tech on the market maybe wasn't there. And so I decided I would build my own mobile voting tech. So started this project 4 years ago. We will finish it this year, meaning first half of 2025. And when it's done, it will be free and open source. And I'll run you through how it works. So you're a registered voter in Portland, or is it Willamette County? What's the county you're in?
Willamette. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
No, it's Multnomah County. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what's you city of Portland? So you go on the App Store, you find let's just call it the Portland Board of Elections app, you download it. And the first thing they say is, okay, is Gigi a registered voter in Portland? You put in your info, yes. Second question, is Gigi really Gigi, right? So the first thing is multi-factor authentication. So like if you forgot your Google password, they send you a code, you type that in.
Right.
Same thing here. Then if you've seen like Clear at the airports, we do a scan of your face.
Right.
You match that up against your ID. So now we know, okay, this is really Gigi. Great. Here's your ballot. Shows up on your screen. Ballot is as simple and straightforward as can be. You look through it, you make your choices, you double check it. And then when you hit submit, 2 things happen. The first is your ballot is immediately encrypted. The second is you get a tracking code as if it were like a FedEx package.
Wow.
You know where your ballot stands. Goes back to the Board of Elections and they air gap it, which means they take it offline. And they don't decrypt your ballot until it's no longer connected to the internet, which means no one else can access it.
Right.
And after it's decrypted, a paper copy automatically prints out. That gets mixed in with all of the other ballots. You know where your ballot stands because your tracking code shows you it was received, tabulated, printed, and so on. And then the underlying code itself is what's called open source, which means it can be audited by anybody. And so we're just about done building that technology. This is all a philanthropic project. I've done it out of Tusk Philanthropies. I've put $20 million of my own money into this so far. And then the next phase is kind of where we are now, which is how do we legalize this, which most voters would like to do it. But most politicians are afraid of changing the system and potentially.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm going to start. My thought is let's start local municipal elections. So mayor, council, school board, stuff like that. So we're going to run legislation in about 6 different cities next year around the country. That would authorize mobile voting for local elections. And my hope is that we'll pass those bills, get it going, show that it works. And I think once we can show that it works and that it's safe, there aren't a lot of other good arguments to make against it, right? The only valid argument is, well, is it safe? And so if we can prove, yes, it is,
it's safe,
then I think ultimately it gets hard to stop us. And so, look, if in 10 years you can vote in every election on your phone, that would be great. I understand this is a really long, really difficult project. It's probably the hardest thing I've ever worked on.
It's probably, I'm sure it is. Yeah. Yeah.
So I truly believe that this is the most scalable solution to democracy, because if you want more people to vote, you have to meet them where they are.
Right.
And where they are is the supercomputer sitting in their pocket.
Yeah. Well, what was so brilliant about the way you organize the book is you start with, this is the way things are now. Bad. These are all the attempts to make things better. Then you go, here's the answer to make things better. Then you say, and these are other people who think this is a great idea. So the support is already there. Then the last part is, this is how you can get on board. And then all these wonderful appendices. So if you want to lobby for this yourself, you can go out and do that. So it was a gorgeous way of organizing your argument that really led people through it. It was almost like a way to deal with all the fear, skepticism, et cetera, you knew would be there.
Yeah. And look, hopefully some people who didn't agree with us have read the book and come around. We unfortunately kind of live in a world now where everyone is sort of huddled in their own quarters and echo chambers, and, kind of only read and listen and watch people who say what they already think. So It is possible that people who don't agree with us sort of never encounter the book to begin with. But I am, taking every opportunity I can, whether it's on podcasts or TV or speeches or wherever I can, to spread the message on this thing. And, my hope is that we can get it off the ground. And look, I'm a first generation American. My family came here from refugee camps in Europe after World War II. We've been very lucky. I've been able to make a nice living. I've been able to build a life for myself and my family. And I want to see this country succeed. And I think the only way to overcome the extreme polarization and dysfunction that we have right now is to move things back to the middle. And that's only going to happen if politicians are incentivized to start representing the mainstream rather than just the extremes. And this is the way we do it.
Yeah. What I hope it does also is capture such a huge number of people out there who have so much apathy about the system that they're not voting at all. You know what I mean? Well, and it's just because it's just so sad, that they just feel like, what's the point?
Right. So my hope, we'll see, but would be, if we're right, and if mobile voting works, and if it moves things to the middle, then things start getting done again. So trust in government and trust in most institutions, whether it's higher ed or the church or the media or anything else, has really been plummeting since the Vietnam. And people are rightfully cynical. It is really hard to argue with them when they are. But if they start to see, okay, my city council, my state legislature, even the U.S. Congress are now able to work together and compromise and find solutions on things that matter to me, then maybe their level of trust and faith in government starts to improve again. And maybe they say, you know what? Maybe I should work in government. Maybe I should run for office. Maybe I should get involved. And then the quality of people involved goes up, and that gets us a better government, which gets us a better society. So that's a secondary effect, and it may take a long time to happen, but that's where I hope we land.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. One thing I've noticed about you, having listened to a lot of your podcasts, interviews in the last few weeks, is you are great at interrupting.
I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult.
No, it isn't at all. It's a very New York thing. It's funny when I teach, public speaking workshops in Oregon, I have to tell people, no, really, you can interrupt me. No, really, you can't. It's how we talk. But when I'm in the East Coast, I definitely don't need to say that because people do it. So if you were going to give, and because I often have to do this, instructions for somebody who's not naturally an interrupter, this is how you interrupt. What would you say? What would you do?
Yeah, I think a few things. Look, because I just interrupted you a second ago, and then I caught myself.
You did. I saw that. You did.
And then I kind of waited for you to finish. So one is you got to be respectful and polite, right? One area that I run into trouble as a podcast host, and I don't know if you run into this too sometimes, is I ask a question, and the guests answer the question, but in the longest way possible. And I'm sitting there like, I don't want to be a jerk. I don't want to be polite, but we got to move on. And so trying to figure out how to politely do that is a challenge. But I would say as soon as you feel like it's not wildly impolite, then you jump in. And what you want to do is jump in with a point that is really germane to what they're talking about, right? Oftentimes it's like people speak, and then when someone else speaks, they think about, instead of listening to what they say, they think about what they're going to say next. And then the next thing they say really has nothing to do with what the other person just said. And that's when you interrupt, then it's just annoying, right?
Right.
For me, a really good podcast is if I don't look at my questions once, because we're just having a conversation. And it's really why I've learned that I really prefer, whenever I can, to get people to come into my studio and do it in person, because it just feels so much more intimate than over, Zoom or whatever it is. And if I can really listen to them, I know big picture what I want to ask. I know why I invited them on in the first place. But within that, it's a real conversation if I hear what they're talking about and my questions are directly germane to their comments, and I'm asking follow-ups and all of that. And that's what makes it a good podcast. That's what makes it a good conversation. And I think when you interrupt, you're interrupting to ask questions. People don't mind that at all.
Right.
If you start to talk about yourself, then they do. And one thing I will say, I don't know if you have found this, but I think that being a podcast host has made me a much better conversationalist.
Interesting.
Because I have really learned how to listen and how to ask good questions. And I think that now, in fact, I'm pretty socially awkward. And so if I have to go to something where like I'm going to have to sit with a bunch of strangers,
yeah.
I have no problem getting up and speaking in front of an audience of 5,000 people or TV in front of 1 million people. I won't give it a second thought.
Wait, you don't get nervous when you have to get up on stage like that? Not at all?
A dinner party, not in the flex. But if I have to go to like a cocktail party, I'm a wreck, right? I'm terrible. And I avoid them mainly. But if I do have to do it, like I remember over the summer, I had to go to someone's 50th birthday party, but I was a +1. So I didn't really know anyone there. And they didn't seat the couples together. So I'm sitting with strangers. And I basically decided I'm going to treat people on both sides of me as if they were guests on my podcast.
That's great. So you asked good questions.
And you know what? Neither of them were all that interesting, to be honest, but they loved it because no one ever asked them that many questions about themselves, right? And like, listen, follow up. So they had a great time. I would say I had a great time, but I at least made it through.
Yeah.
Look, it's possible they could have been interesting. Some people really are. You don't know. Yeah, I have found that podcasting is actually has been really useful to me, not in the ways that I expected when I started the podcast.
Right.
Money. I don't know if that's made me any more famous or influential or anything else like that. But it has made me a better listener, a better questioner, and a better conversation.
Yeah. Well, it's funny with interrupting. I feel like you do need to be up to speed with somebody. It's almost like when you're merging on a highway. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. You can't merge at like 20. You got to get up to speed. Yep. And if it feels like it's a build on what they're saying, because that's I think what New Yorkers do. We're like, oh yeah. You know, we build. But you can't. But you do need to be up to speed and almost poised and ready. Like I even notice now I'm interrupting you more as we go on because like, oh my God, I'm with the New Yorker now. I can get back in my New York.
Notice.
Right. So it's interesting because people that aren't used to it are used to waiting until you're done and then they'll start again, which, you can't interrupt that way. You said one other thing that made me think of something. Oh yeah. So when you're thinking about developing an idea, are you somebody who's like a verbal processor where you like to talk it through to figure out what you think about something? Do you like quiet writing time where you're alone just with you and the pen?
Ultimately both, but I say for me, I think best when the words are in front of me on a screen.
Right.
And so for me, writing up my ideas, and editing them and coming back to them and thinking through them, it lets me develop a good product. Then I will usually start discussing it with people.
Right.
I'll often also share the document with them. So, and through that whole process, it all evolves and kind of gets hopefully to a decent point.
Right.
But yeah, look, also forget about when I'm trying to create something new. I found that one good way to deal with my problems is to write about them. And that just kind of helps me process it in a way that's different than just sort of compulsively thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. Speaking or writing, it's sort of like it gets it out of you and into the world, into something out there. And then it's almost like a purging. I totally agree.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a personal question. On a recent podcast, you made a reference to having been bullied as a kid, and you often talk about being an outsider. And I'm just wondering how that childhood experience and how that feeling of being an outsider has affected how you shape ideas, how you communicate, and how you advise others to do that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, our childhoods affect us in ways we don't even really understand, both good and bad, right? As a parent, I've tried to be really, really aware of that. So I don't screw up my kids too much, although I probably have anyway. But I would say that, the experience that I had as a kid, and I was just one of those kids that was kind of a magnet for bullying, unfortunately. And interestingly, so until I was about 20, all I wanted to do was fit in. All I wanted was for people to like.
Which is most of the under 20-year-olds, right?
I tried so hard, and the harder I tried, the worse it got. And then all of a sudden, I just realized, I don't know if I can curse on this or not, but I was like, fuck it. I am not trying anymore. And it wasn't because I thought it was a strategy. I was like, I genuinely don't care. Don't care anymore, whatever. And of course, the minute you stop caring and trying, people want nothing more than to get to know you. Right. And so I think in a weird way, for better and for worse, there's a lot of defiance and independence in the way that I speak, in the way that I write, in the way that I engage with the world. I think sometimes it is compelling because what I'm conveying is, look, I believe this thing and I'm going to go do it. And I hope you agree with me, but if you don't, I don't give a shit. Right. I'm going to do it anyway. Which tends to then bring people along most of the time. Sometimes, by the way, though, I engage in public conflict that I don't need to, right? Because I think that sometimes picking up fight with a big politician or a big CEO or whatever is in public probably makes me feel safe in a way. Like, oh, if I can take on this really powerful person in the media and we're going back and forth at each other, then no regular person's going to mess with me because look what I'm doing, right? And by the way, sometimes those fights are right and sometimes they're wrong, and so, there's definitely, it's a double-edged sword. But I think that experience has sort of ultimately taught me that the only sort of point of view that really matters at the end of the day, in many ways, is my own, right? If I feel good about what I'm doing, if I believe in what I'm doing, if I genuinely think it's right, I'm okay with it, whether it fails or it succeeds, whether people like it or they don't like it. And almost sort of, counterintuitively, the less you care, the more people will support you.
What's interesting, though, is that you're also self-reflective. Do you know what I mean?
A lot of therapy.
A lot of therapy. Yeah. So that, there's a lot of confidence there. There, is something you call not caring. If this were a therapy session, we could dive into that, what that means exactly. But the self-reflection, the ability to, realize that you probably didn't need to insult a speaker at this event you did, And by the way, did you ever reach out to apologize to that guy?
No, because then he wrote an op-ed for the Iowa newspaper just trashing me.
Oh,
and
God.
I was like, the idea was I didn't respond to that. I was like, all right, we're good.
Right. Yeah.
So I felt like that was fair.
Yeah.
But, look, I would argue, so I do show on my podcast and I know in my classes a lot of vulnerability, but to me, that's an ultimate position of strength.
Yeah.
Not weakness, right?
Yeah.
If I can be totally candid and vulnerable about my what's good about me and what's bad about me, then to a certain extent, if I own all my problems, you got nothing on me, right? Because I've already called them and owned them.
Right. There's no skeletons in this closet. Yeah.
So I think that in some ways, being vulnerable is the ultimate expression of confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of my favorite podcasts is Alan Alda's Clear and Vivid. I don't know if you've ever listened to it.
I haven't. Is it good?
It's good. I mean, it depends on who the guest is, of course. But one of the questions he asks all his guests, and I was dying to ask you this one, is what do you do when you're stuck with a nonstop talker?
That's a really good question. I mean, part of it depends. What I've learned is, are they interesting or not, right? So if someone is a nonstop talker, but they're like really brilliant, which sometimes in my work I encounter people like that.
Right.
Then I just kind of say, you know what, learn whatever you can here. And then if they're a nonstop talker and they are boring or arrogant or whatever else, I just try to get myself out of that situation.
Yeah.
You know, but sometimes, you have people who don't really have a lot of self-awareness, or maybe, they're a little on the spectrum or whatever it is. But if they have interesting things to say, sometimes I'll just be like, all right, this is a good opportunity to learn.
Yeah. So my last question for you is, anything you wish you were better at in terms of speaking, presenting, etc.?
Patience. I lack patience. And I think that if I had more of it, I could probably have slightly better timing in the way that I speak. But I think also I roll ideas out too quickly. I don't develop them enough because I'm so eager to get them into the world and get them going. I pull the trigger on investments, new companies, new causes too quickly sometimes because I get really excited. I get too excited about the idea of something. And that sort of propels me to action, which is good in a way, because I do a lot of stuff and sometimes it works, but it's also bad because I can look back at failures that I've had in business and politics and life and say, in retrospect, that was pretty obvious. And if I had just spent a little more time on the front end thinking about it, I probably wouldn't have made that mistake.
Right. That's interesting. And just in you describing this, you did slow down a little bit. And, you're probably your version of going too slow is like just perfect for most people.
Right. Yeah. And you speak to my Corey FC, my comms director, like before every speech, just like mouths to me, slow, because he knows I'm going to talk to you for that.
Yeah, great. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Bradley, for good questions.
Happy I crashed into you in New York City.
Yeah, me too.
I want to end by saying, tell us how we can find out more about you and the Mobile Voting Project.
Yeah, two things. So if it's me you're interested in, if you go to bradleytusk.com or go to LinkedIn, you can find a bunch of propaganda there. If it's mobile voting, if you go to mobilevoting.org, we've got a lot of information there. If you really like what I said and you want to check out the book, it's called Vote With Your Phone by Mobile Voting is Our Final Shot at Saving Democracy. Came out last September. You can get it anywhere. And if you're in New York City, I happen to own a bookstore in the Lower East Side called P&T Netwear, and we've got plenty of copies there. So come by and check us out.
Thank you so much for speaking with me, Bradley Tusk, and thank you for listening to Gigi Presents. This has been Gigi Rosenberg in conversation with Bradley Tusk. I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.